2020 was like an incredibly prolific period for me. I'd wake up out of bed and I was doing deals, and it was like I had the world in the palm of my hand. It felt like I was, moving markets every time I communicated publicly. That was incredibly dizzying, and it had the exact opposite effect on me that it should have. What it should have done, I should have taken a step back and say, hold on, this has nothing to do with me. What is this moment? And the moment would have been, we're at the tail end of zero rates. We had trillions of dollars that the government had basically given to individuals. We had an enormous M2 money supply. And instead, I thought it was me. And then in 2022, when the war in Ukraine started, the bottom fell out financially in Silicon Valley, in frankly, a lot of things that I was working on. It was such a wake-up call, and it was the biggest blessing of my life. I never thought I would be in a position to have made that much money. In hindsight, I've never been more blessed than to torch, $3 or $4 billion.
Do you think, there's, it's still ongoing, the war in Ukraine, but it had, you said, an immediate effect on markets. It was like a pivot point. You could
put it on a map, March of 2022. I'll never forget it.
So that war, my opinion, was, welcomed by many in the West. And I wonder if, whatever they said, it was clear they were for it. So do you think that those two things are connected?
It's not clear to me how connected they are, but the first part of what you said I do agree with, which is that we have silently allowed this insidious war machine to take over large parts of the government.
Yes.
And what's so interesting about this is that it actually, I would have said, was more riddled inside the Republican Party.
Yes.
But it turns out over these last few years, especially since this MAGA takeover, this hostile takeover that Donald Trump effected, which I think is enormously important in historical context. But it's more within the Democratic Party now.
Yeah.
There are these neocon warmongers that want to connect the dots between people suffering and their own economic opportunity. And I think that that's very scary. And I think that whenever you see that, you have to push against that. Humans should not be at war. We should not be fighting and killing each other. It's just a simple foundational moral principle that I think we all have to live by.
I totally
You just
agree.
cannot go there. And you have to push back on every avenue of people that try to take you there.
I couldn't agree more. So, sorry to derail what you were saying, because it was very interesting. So 2020, everything you touch seems to turn a profit. 2 years later, everything changes. Why is that good for you, losing all the money or all that money?
Because I had to take a step back and actually figure out how much of this was actually me and my preparation and my process, or my dark passenger. And here's what I mean by this, because I've thought about this a lot. I think we all have a dark passenger. So when you are born, you're kind of like this body that has the capability to do anything. I mean, we talk about this, but we don't say it enough, but the genetic diversity of all humanity is minuscule. So I think I interpret that as the capability of all humanity is pretty incredible. But you have this huge distribution of outcomes. And part of that are the things that happen to you as you're growing up, right? Your lived experience, right? It's the nature part, not the nurture necessarily. And nature gives some people a very dark passenger, right? Some of them will then commit crimes. Some of them will become murderers. Some of them will become drug addicts. Some of them, will have this litany of things happen to them. In my case, my lived experience gave me this thing where I have always battled this insecurity that I've just felt I'm basically worthless. You're a kid, you come here, you don't really fit in. You try to kind of make a social life out of everything else that you're supposed to do doesn't really work, right? And so that creates a chip on my shoulder. And it was this sort of thing where I always felt I was on the outside looking in. And then when I, worked at Facebook and then left, and all of a sudden in my early 30s, I had, more success and more money, to be honest, than I ever thought I would have. I spent a lot of time, a decade basically, feeding that insecurity, buying things, accumulating things. And to be honest with you, if I'm being really honest with myself, look, I built a really successful investment business by all numerical accounts, but I would say for me, it was a lost decade. I didn't do anything. And I got to a point in 2022 where all of that stuff, so much of it, had to be stripped away, and I had to look at what was left and rebuild from fundamentals. I had an incredible wife. What a blessing.
That's for sure.
I had incredible kids. What a blessing.
5
incredible kids.
That's amazing.
Tucker, it's amazing. Having kids is amazing. I had incredible friends. I have a Thursday night poker game that I will, frankly, no matter where I am in the world, I will go out of my way, planes, trains, and automobiles, to fly back for, because of what that game gives me with my friends. So I have these little things.
Where's the game?
In my house.
Really?
Yeah, and it's great too, because, by the way,
How many players?
Well, so poker. So in Silicon Valley, there's like a group of us, like some well-known folks that we all get together. And my wife was the one that did this. When she first looked at the game, you'd see all these people, and it was really interesting. But, a lot of my friends have a touch of the tism. And so what happens is, you just end up like looking down at your cards for 8 hours straight. Nothing was happening. And she said, guys, this is ridiculous. You can play for a few hours, but at 7 p.m., we're going to break for dinner. We're going to sit around a table and we're all going to talk. And you must look at each other in the eyes. And it was so funny. But it's become a ritual. And for all of us, we all feel seen. And then slowly what happens is people start to talk about things that they would have never talked about. And what you see is this repetitive pattern. People with this dark passenger, lots of insecurity, they achieve a lot, but all of that a lot is externally validated, but not internally felt. And so there's just this sense that there's an emptiness, and people start to panic. I thought that XYZ would solve the problem. I thought the watches would solve the problem, the boat, the plane, the clothes, the chains. None of it solves it. And everybody, like clockwork, all of my friends go through it. And so it's funny, I'm sort of at the tail end of this, but that poker game has been almost like this therapy session where we all get to talk. And then as a result, people feel calmer. They feel a little bit more seen about what's going on. My point in telling you this is not sympathy. It's just to state that like everybody is going through this struggle.
Yes.
So back to me, I was able to sort of put a finger on what my thing is. What is that, big sack that I've been trying to carry up a hill that is totally worthless and not worth my time? It's this idea that I am worthless and I'm not worth anybody's time. And that just comes from the way that I was raised and the things that happened to me. I don't want any sympathy for that except to say that's my thing. But now that I know it, I can try to do things that are more productive in ways where I feel real value. And I think that's a very useful process because it reintroduces, I think it can fix for so many people the thing that is so broken right now. We are completely despiritualized.
Yes.
Nobody believes in a higher order, faith, God. And so I think what happens is everybody has this Carl Jung moment. All of this difficulty sits on top of them. And at some point, they may never say it out loud. They think, I am living in a tale told by an idiot, right? That's that famous quote about why spirituality is important. And when you feel that way and you don't have an answer, you start to feel angry and you start to push back and you start to think, tear it all down. None of this is working. It's all BS. So I want to try to solve it for myself. And then as I live and as I just kind of do the things that I'm doing, start new businesses, make new investments, I want to try to point this out because I think by pointing it out, you have a chance for other people to start questioning things. Do I have a dark passenger? How
did you get so self-aware about all of this? Most people when they feel sad to sort of bumble forward and keep doing what they have always been doing to no effect. What stopped you and made you think about what was happening?
It's still very much a source of anger for me. Like, this idea that I'm basically worthless makes me mad. And I projected it for many years sort of on the people that my parents for the most part, and all that dysfunction. Because I think about it a lot. And then when I make mistakes, so in that 2022 period, when I started to really write down, here are all the mistakes I made, 1 or 2 layers.
You actually wrote them down.
Wrote them down. It's like, okay, I invested $200 million in this thing. It went to zero. What was I thinking? And I would first, in your mind is very clever. At first you lie to yourself, and you lie to yourself incredibly well. Well, I underwrote it this way. I thought the discounted cash flows were, it's all BS. One layer after that was, and then I communicated my thinking to hold myself accountable. Also BS. That communication got me attention, and I liked the way it made me feel. And then I said, hold on a second. That feels true. I hate that I can even say it, that it may be true, but that feels true. And so then I go back and I start to think, like, how many other decisions that I made in that period were rooted in that? And when I saw 4 or 5 of them, I said, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And then I went back and I said, how many other decisions in my life have I been making that were rooted in the idea of, look at me? And it turned out that there were a lot. The things I bought, the clothes I wore, the things I said, the way that I tried to live a life. And I felt that that was not me. I was ashamed of it. Then I was angry about it. And then I asked my wife, I need you to help me fix it. And this is what I mean by, like, you have to have a partner, I think, in crime that can really go through the ups and downs with you.
Damn, what did your wife say when you told her this?
She's like, I've been telling you this for years. What every wife says. But, I was like, finally, I listened. And, she always makes this joke. She's like, I could tell you the smartest thing in the world. And she's like, you think you need a man to tell you. And I said, well, this time this man was me. Yeah. And it's a joke that we...
No, it's true, though.
And my father-in-law. And my father-in-law, when I finally, kind of got rid of all the anger that I had, my father-in-law was a father that I wish I had had. And what I mean by this is, like, some people may not understand this, Tucker. You may or may not. It is extremely discomforting to feel unconditional love from the people around you if you have not felt it. If you have always felt it, you don't know what it means when somebody says it.
Yes.
You're like, what does that mean? I don't know. I knew what it did not, what I thought love looked like. And then when you have people that love you in this way, it's tilting. And it made me angry. Because I would go back to this, I would push back on this, and I would go back to that and say, why didn't that look like this? And I was in an endless loop of just being mad.
So when you experienced the way your wife's family loved each other, it made you mad about your childhood?
Yeah, and at first I was mad. I was mad at her. Meaning subconsciously, like, because she's giving me something that I don't understand, and I thought, there's got to be a catch. Yeah. Where's the asterisks? There's always a catch. And, for years, she's like, there's no catch.
Damn.
And then she says to me, this is the best thing that's ever happened to us. She's like, now, this next phase of totally building will be that you and I do it together. And again, I freaked out. And I thought, what do you mean?
Where'd you find this woman?
Oh my God, she's from the heavens. She turns out she's from Milan, but she's from the heavens. And she's like, but we'll do it together. And it's going to be incredible, whatever it is, because we're going to look back and the process will have been the thing. And I needed a guide, and I needed to be open to listening. And so I needed that event, right? Because think about a kid, me. I grew up in Sri Lanka. There's a civil war. We claim refugee status in Canada, grew up on welfare. I get an engineering degree, and within a year I'm in the United States, and my career just goes up and to the right. everything was working. Youngest vice president at AOL, when I was 26 years old, running this big messaging business. Then I get recruited by Zuck. I go to Facebook as one of the early execs. I build that business, all the key things that they look back on now, the network effects, the early monetization, internationalization. That was my team. Most of my team still runs that company. So it was like, then I left and I started an investment business. Those investment returns are really good. So everything was quote unquote working. So I held myself in really high regard, but for the wrong things, if that makes sense.
Of course it does.
I could point to a bank account or Twitter followers or all of this stuff. And then when that was undone, right, 2022, 2023, what happened? I thought that this was all supposed to work and it would work forever. It was an opportunity for me to really reset and tell myself the truth, the ugly truth. Hey, man, you are motivated by stupid, inconsequential stuff. Get back to basics. And then when I looked around, it wasn't just me. There's so many of my peers in Silicon Valley that had also just wasted the last decade doing nothing. We were all quote unquote wealthier, but we were more broke,
I wonder, I do know, and I've certainly seen that a lot, having spent a lot of time around rich people, but I've rarely seen someone address it as honestly as you are now. And do you know other people who've been willing to look at themselves as clearly?
I think there are people that may not talk about it, but I think that they've lived it. I know Elon's lived it, where he's always underwritten things based on the great thing about being in Silicon Valley is that there are people that I have the honor and the luck of knowing, and like him, but I didn't really try to learn from him until 2022, if that makes sense. Meaning,
yes.
There were all these decisions that he made that I would reductively reduce to that's a smart business decision. And it had nothing to do with business. He was always leading from what are my core moral beliefs and let me act on those. Like the money never mattered. He never did anything to live that experience. He loves his friends. He loves his family. It took me a decade of knowing him until I started to listen to that and to really hone in on that. So he's an example. Then there are folks that are a little bit older that have gone through it. My father-in-law has gone through it, ups and downs, and he's built an incredible business. And he's had to face tremendous hardship where he's had to underwrite, well, what is really important? Am I an honorable person? Is my word my bond? When you shake my hand and we do a deal, it is what it is. If I can, make X, but it's way too much. And if I can make half as X, but it's more, he makes drugs, life sciences drugs, make them more accessible. Should I do? He makes those decisions. And so you see his morality play out in his actions. My wife. So I think now I have 3 or 4 people in my life, but I had to listen. And before I chose not to listen because my ego said, hey man, you're the best.
You've heard people say it. If you're not doing anything wrong, why do you care if other people watch what you're doing? Well, because privacy is integral to freedom. No privacy, no freedom. Well, it's true that a VPN could come in handy for those who spend their time browsing the dark web, doing scandalous things. VPNs are not actually for criminals. They're for everybody, particularly for people who are doing nothing wrong. People like you and me who want freedom from the creepy people out there, the big data brokers. You might not know it, but big data brokers make a ton of money by selling your personal data, information about you, and they have access to that because you're not using a VPN. Everything you do online can be seen by them and then sold by them. It's time to change that, and ExpressVPN can help you do it. Our data is protected because we use ExpressVPN. It serves as a lock on our door to keep the internet vultures out. And thanks to a new feature, it can now alert you when someone tries to use your social security number. By the way, if someone's trying to use your social security number, you probably should know about it. ExpressVPN is the total package. It's easy to use. Right now, you get an extra 4 months for free when you use our special link, and here it is. Get a pen, expressvpn.com/Tucker. We use it. We recommend it. So you got very rich in your early 30s.
Yeah.
That itself is weird.
It's really...
I mean, it's not weird where you live. It's not uncommon where you live, but it's historically like there's not a lot of that.
Yeah.
What are the upsides and downsides of that, do you think?
The upside, I think, is that you can start to really focus on things that you care about. The downside is if you don't know what those things that you care about really are, right. You're going to waste a lot of time.
Good point. What did you do when this is after the Facebook IPO?
I mean, I bought a piece of the Warriors. That was really cool. I was like a 10% owner of the Warriors. I had a press release from the NBA. And there was like 2 players on the team at the time that were older than me. So
that's pretty weird.
And I made some amazing friendships with them. When we won the championships, we would go to Vegas. We would kind of like party together. Don't get me wrong, like an incredible experience, especially for, an ugly nerd that had no social life. Do you know what I mean? So I took advantage of that because it's like filling a jug of water, right? That jug had always been empty. I was never invited out, right? So, okay, I thought, now I'm invited out. Obviously, it's because, the position, it's not like, we grew up together or whatever, but I would get invited out. Okay, every now and then, maybe more often than not, I'd just pay for the dinner. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm in the mix. I'm in the game. But then the jug fills up. And then you're like, wait a minute. Because you think like when the jug is 2/3 full, oh, don't worry, it's that extra third that's just going to fix it all.
It's true.
So you just go through these cycles. And I mean, that was a cool thing. You go after material possessions. That doesn't do anything.
It really doesn't.
These are all very hollowing things. I think like the thing that, like I said, like, the problem with things like social media, what they do is they glorify these things. We all fall for it. I fell for it. So when you have money, you go and you buy these things because you think this is what happiness looks like or, success looks like. And it's not. It's none of that stuff. Now, nobody listening to this will believe it because everybody wants to live that over and over because it's not like a very destructive life lesson. You know what I mean? Like to have like a Laura Piana sweater and not need it. But the bigger message is more important, which is if you have a sense of what's important, you can kind of see the things that are really happening in a much more, they're more in focus. So like, I would say like now that I'm 48, I'm much more aware of like, what does it mean to be an American? What is my job as an American businessman, as an engineer, as an entrepreneur? It's not all of this other superficial garbage because it adds nothing. It's to actually allow the system that rewarded and benefited me to be just a little bit better in terms of the contributions I give to it before I'm no longer part of the system in 50 or 60 years. That's very motivating for me now. And this idea that my kids can go and join Team America and do cool stuff and find happiness, find a great husband, find a great wife, have a bunch of kids and live a good life and know what their dad went through and have a better sense of that. That seems like an additive thing I can add to the system. To be a good example for my friends when they start to go through their own struggles, that they can kind of course correct a little bit faster than I did. I mean, I went through a divorce, right? So that's a terrible thing.
After you got rich?
After all that, I went through a divorce.
Ooh.
I was very lucky to find my wife, but my point is that my first marriage, when you get a divorce, that's a death in the family.
Literally, yeah.
Literally a death. And then you are complicit in the commission of that death. It's the husband and the wife. I mean, there are only 2 people responsible.
That's right.
And so I see a bunch of my friends who you can see some veering and teetering. And now I can sort of intervene a little bit and just kind of cajole and nudge and, help them. And I'm not saying that these are all really grand, highfalutin things, but they actually address the inner part of what I needed for a very long time. I just didn't realize it.
No, those are the most important things.
Yeah.
If you can help someone save his marriage, I mean, I think that's a lot more important and virtuous than most things that we do.
Than, frankly, most everything, especially when you think of how it compounds to that husband and wife's children.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
it's the key thing.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And a happy marriage makes happy children. So,
Yeah.
It redounds through the generations, I would say.
Exactly.
So, speaking of children, I was having a conversation with one of my children this morning. I know a lot of rich people, obviously, and we're talking about somebody who we know is, good guy, billionaire, who is totally focused on making more money to the exclusion of
everything else.
Kind of. And one of my children said to me, and not in a judgmental way, but, with affection for this person, but like, why? Like, what is that exactly? I mean, why, I guess it's just on autopilot to some extent. Like, I make money, I'll make more money. But the drive to make more money that is literally superfluous, like you will never need that money. What is that?
It's an emptiness somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's a jug that they're trying to fill. And they think that the closer they get to filling it, the problem is like your mind just switches the jug to an even bigger jug. And then it gets closer to being full, and then it switches again and it switches again. I think the much better way to think about this problem is, what am I doing with my time that actually helps the place that gave me an opportunity be better, and the people that live beside me be better? That is a really morally valuable statement. And then you can kind of like look at all the things and all the problems that make everybody mad in the United States as an opportunity to actually do them better. And that is useful. And when you have money, the one thing that you can do is you can accelerate that change much faster than folks that have to take a much more arduous path.
For sure.
And I think we've lost that. There's not enough people that basically say, okay, you know what? The United States has given me so much. Now, how do I give back, quote unquote? And you don't necessarily have to give back by going into nonprofit or going into government. You can just acknowledge the problems that are there and go fix them. And you can fix them by starting for-profit companies, which are always the best way. And I wonder, like, why don't more people do it?
It's a great question. You can have 5 decent children too, which is probably the best thing you could do for any country. So thank you for that. But I do notice, and have always noticed, that some of the people who've benefited most from the United States dislike it the most intensely, and I don't really understand what that is.
I think that is, I think that what's happened. So I'll give you my framework. You can tell me maybe where you agree or disagree. But it is important for all 330 million Americans to take a step back and acknowledge this one truth. And I think that it is completely a canonical statement that is inviolate for being an American. We are the single most important country in existence in the world. We are the most important country today. We must be the most important country tomorrow. Period. If you say that enough times and you believe it, then there are 2 things that underpin that, and I think only 2. We are the single most vibrant economy in the world, and we are the single strongest military in the world. And if you can agree to those 2 things, which I think should be non-controversial, if you say, meaning, like if I said to you, hey, Tucker, we make the best oranges and burritos in America. That does not yield the most important country in the world. If I said we make the best shoes and the best flat panel TVs, that does not equate to the most powerful country in the world. But if I said to you, we have the strongest and most vibrant economy and the strongest and most powerful military, that is the strongest and most important country in the world.
Yes.
And then there is only one thing that gives you both of those 2 things, which is technological supremacy. So go back to these examples. If I said to you, we write the best books, those books could be incredibly powerful, but it does not give you technical supremacy. If I said to you that we have the most abundant energy, oil fields, nat gas, it's important, but it does not give us technological supremacy. Those that get there will be in a position to create the most vibrant economy. They'll take that money and then create the most powerful military. They'll put those 2 things together. They'll be the most powerful country. So I think today, sitting here, January of 2025, we are in an existential risk of losing our place in the world. And the reason is that we have people from the inside trying to sabotage our economy effectively and trying to sabotage our military capability. And they do that not explicitly, But they do that because they are in positions of leadership and they fundamentally don't know what they're doing. And this is what needs to get called out. And I think what we need is this wholesale reform of the people that are at the levers and in the controls of these things. The lack of economic judgment, the lack of military judgment is ruining America's ability to be the most important country in the world. We are, in Silicon Valley, I think it's fair to say that we have had a lost decade. And when you look underneath why, what are the two most or three most or four most incredible technological achievements that the Silicon Valley has created in the last decade? You're hard-pressed to find it. So in one example, you have Elon. He's created reusable rocketry. He's created an entire global mesh of communications infrastructure. He's created electric cars. That's an incredible thing. And he's done that with one hand tied behind his back, meaning fighting the government, local, state, federal, at every single turn over the last 10 or 15 years. What have the rest of us done? We've created AirPods and Instagram Reels.
Why?
I think a lot of people fell into the same lull that I fell into. We had people pushing back constantly. We got distracted. We wasted time. We took an entire cadre. Look, engineering is actually very much like professional sports, Tucker. Like, there are Michael Jordans in engineering, okay? And there are many people that are not very close to Michael Jordan, couldn't even make a JV scrub team.
Yeah.
There is that crazy distribution of capability. And let's just say in Silicon Valley, there's 5 million engineers. If you add up all the companies and all the people, maybe that's a lot, but I don't know. I can tell you that there's at least 25 or 50,000 of them that are like Michael Jordan-esque capable. And instead, what we told these people is, hey, don't win 6 championships in 8 years. Don't be the most prolific player ever. What we told them to do was like, hey, you can dribble down the court, but don't dribble too fast because you'll make these other people feel bad. Hey, you know what? You can do a couple of layups, but don't do too many layups because you should actually pass the ball so that these other people we hired because the team photo looks better, give them a chance to score. You did all of these dumb things. Then team management would come down and say, you know what? I actually think the goal should be to play wiffle ball. And then you take Michael Jordan off the basketball court and you make him play wiffle ball. That's what Silicon Valley did. We took all this incredible talent. We got distracted by the money.
Yeah.
Right? Because what really did happen in the Valley? What did happen is all the billionaires became decabillionaires and centibillionaires. Right? The wealth went through the roof. The innovation went through the floor. So we got lulled into this economic complacency. My gosh, I'm so much smarter because I'm so much richer. No, you're not. No, you're not. I'll give you a different example.
It sounds like just good old-fashioned decadence, kind of.
I think that there was some sabotage, meaning, or maybe sabotage is not the right word, but there were traps that were laid out and we all fell in them. The DEI trap, the woke trap, all this kind of stuff that were distractions to core innovation. I'll give you 2 examples that paint the picture. I'll bookend it. I'll give you a Silicon Valley bookend. The beginning of the bookend is in the early 2000s. There's an incredible professor, Jennifer Doudna in Berkeley, and she pioneers CRISPR, which is the ability to edit genes. Let's take that off the table whether you think it's morally right or wrong for a second, okay? It could be a tool, it could be a weapon. I grant that. But it is undeniably a tool that sits in the toolbox that we call technological supremacy. Over the next decade, what Silicon Valley managed to do was embroil themselves in IP lawsuits about who actually owned it. What China did was take the open source awareness of it and pioneer it. Was that smart? Whether you agree or you disagree, should that toolbox be in our toolbox where we can mete it out? Or should it be in China's toolbox where they can decide? Where if all of a sudden there is some disease in the future and it requires this very precise form of gene editing and only they can do it, and now a state-sponsored entity in China is the one that provisions a cure for 8 billion humans around the world, that will give them tremendous economic power. Is that smart for America to have done that? I think not. I'll give you a different example, which is just today as you and I sit here, President Biden issued an EO. And what the EO said is, executive order, AI is going to be critical. And so we want to give the ability for federal lands to be used for AI data centers. Okay, now you're cooking. This sounds smart. Let's go read the fine print. And by the second or third paragraph, what it says is, however, we need to think about the diversity and equity inclusions of said data centers. and you have to basically give preference to clean power. Well, is that the same clean power that was essentially made impossible because of permitting issues and environmental impact studies? You can't just build solar farms that you want to. You can't build wind farms in America if you want to. You can't build nuclear reactors because they won't let you. These are not technological limitations. These were regulatory limitations. Those are just two examples that just show you cannot do what's in America's best interest right now because people have forgot. They've lost the script. They forgot the priorities. Guys, the priorities are we need to remain the most singularly powerful economic and military entity in the world. The way you do that is through technical supremacy, period. I'll give you another two examples just to, you can tell me if these are boring, but.
Not at all.
Saudi Arabia is doing an incredible job. They're monetizing their oil. They are doing very strategic things with the capital. What they've decided is they're going to allocate money that they take from selling oil to build a global data center infrastructure for AI. That's really smart. And when you look at Saudi Arabia on a map, you think, oh my gosh, this is very smart. Why? Because they sit right in this artery between Asia, Europe, and Africa.
Exactly.
This is critically smart. But what is the one thing that they need that they don't have? It's AI chips. Now, AI, just to break it down for your viewers, think of AI as two buckets. Okay, bucket number one is where you train the brain. Okay, think of AI as a brain. Bucket number one, you train the brain. Bucket number two, you use the brain to make decisions. Okay, the chips that we make to train the brain are under export control, right? We don't want folks to train their own brains necessarily unless we can govern them. That's a Department of Commerce decision on export licensing. The way that we use the brain is a different kind of chip, and we have some export controls there. What will Saudi eventually be forced to do? They're an ally of America. They want to do the right thing, but they have a responsibility to their people to try to become the most incredible, economic and military power in the world. They're going to go and buy the chips from the people that will actually sell it to them.
They'll look east, of course.
They will look east and they'll find it in China. Yet a different example. If you look at Meta has poured tens of billions of dollars to training a brain, okay, an AI brain that's called Llama, right? That's Meta's efforts in AI. And it's open source. It's wonderful, actually. My companies use it. It works. It's high quality. OpenAI, which is the private closed-sourced competitor to Meta and Llama, also has an AI brain that they've trained. GPT, ChatGPT, You've used it probably. They've also spent tens of billions of dollars, in part coming from Microsoft. Meanwhile, in December, a Chinese company open sourced a model where they spent tens of millions of dollars. And in many cases, that digital brain is smarter than both Meta and OpenAI's on many dimensions. So 2 orders of magnitude cheaper. Well, what do you think that means for the other 182 countries around the world that wants to do something in AI? Are they going to take the $10 billion version, Or are they going to take the $10 million version? They're going to take the $10 million one.
Yeah.
And when you unpack, well, why did it cost $10 billion?
That was my question.
It cost $10 billion because of all the roadblocks that we put in front of companies to make the things that we need to maintain our technical supremacy. So I'll give you some examples. There is a huge, so for example, one of the things that China chooses to not do is they don't really respect copyright law. Now, I'm not saying we should violate copyright law, but I think it's important to acknowledge that there is a technical overhang that it creates in training these brains to try to filter out content that the New York Times tags or Fox News tags and says, don't learn on this. You're not allowed unless you have a deal with me. That creates an enormous layer of expense. How do we judge that issue? Today, if you ask somebody, it's a pretty simple conversation. It's not nuanced. It's, do you believe in copyright or do you not believe in copyright? I think it's a much more nuanced question. For the sake of training these digital brains, if there was an economic relationship that we could create, isn't it better that our digital brain is smarter than these other ones and that we make it as cheap as possible? If you ask that question, a lot of people would say, gosh, that's a nuanced question. It's neither an easy no or an easy yes, but on the margins, I would say yes, knowing that there are these impacts. Give you a different example. It takes all this energy to build the data centers. Why does it cost so much? It's not that let's just say you wanted to use solar panels. Is it that the solar panels are expensive? No. Is it that the ability to do the interconnects are expensive? No. It's that building that facility had a multi-year environmental impact study, umpteen lawsuits, all kinds of indirection and misdirection from all of these independent actors who believed that they were pursuing their own priorities. And there was no release valve that said, I appreciate and respect the smelt that you're trying to protect or the land grouse, but this is bigger than that. We need to make sure we maintain our technical superiority. That data center is going to be used by the NSA to protect America. So it needs to go up in 9 months. No ifs, ands, or buts. Right now, we don't have the ability to say that. Or if we do, it's not clear who should say it. And so all of this time costs money. All of this complexity costs money. And the output are practical costs of building these things that are just 2 orders of magnitude bigger than our competitors.
We're not going to use the word revival, but it does seem true that millions of Americans simultaneously are coming to the conclusion that buying things online and going on vacation may not be the sum total purpose of life. Maybe there's something more. And if you're one of those people who's beginning to ask questions, what else is there? One of those people who's become suddenly very interested in God and having a relationship with God, then we cannot recommend an app called Hallow enough. Personally recommend it. It's a frequent topic of conversation in my house. Hallow is the #1 prayer app in the world. It offers thousands of guided prayers, meditations, music options, Gregorian chants, the Bible in a year. It's amazing what's on there. It's great. Hallow is fantastic. It's very easy to use. You build a routine. You can join groups of worshipers, set goals, tailor the whole experience to your exact spiritual needs. It really works. Most apps people get excited about and then stop using them. Hallow, people keep using it because it's great. We recently interviewed the founder and CEO of Hallow, and that conversation left us more convinced than ever that this will never become a godless society because people won't let that happen. People need God. Hallow can help connect you with God. With the March for Life approaching, it's a perfect time to download the Hallow app to unlock a vast array of prayers for pregnant mothers, the unborn, civil leaders, and many others in need of prayer, because prayer actually works. Head over to hallow.com/Tucker, get 3 months free. Hallow. It's awesome. I wonder, though, if just the basic economics of AI just force change. For example, the power draw for AI, I was hearing about it. I was in an AI center in another country 3 days ago, and they were saying they're not exactly sure, what it's going to take to run one, but it could be 10x a normal data center, that was amazing to me. So how do you power that exactly? So you have these competing imperatives. You've got the climate agenda versus AI, which is clearly the future of the economy of California, for example.
Yeah. Can I just say, okay, I have to go on a small diatribe.
Please do. I'm trying to evoke one.
There is nothing that the Western countries can do that will equate in any way, shape, or form the impact of what China and India decides to do. We do not live in small bubbles. There is no glass bubble that sits on top of the United States.
Right.
We all share an ecology. That ecology is extremely complicated and nuanced, and it's a global one. And the reality is that India and China collectively together have way more impact than what you and I are going to do by becoming vegans.
Impact on the climate, on the environment. Is that what you're...
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I've noticed, yes.
So I think the reason why, for example, like we have lost so much ground. The California wildfires are an example that lays this bare. We should have 50% of the American population on solar panels and battery walls today. The reason, it's nice to have that you do it for climate change, but the reason is resilience. The reason is so that you can power yourself in moments of calamity. The reason is so that you can make sure that you can take care of your family, cook food, desalinate water, whatever it is that you need to do.
The prepper approach to energy. I'm with you.
It's just like the practical reality.
I totally agree.
And instead, we make it this sort of like moral blanket that you have to wrap yourself in.
Exactly.
Everybody then takes a view, and all it does is retard progress. So I guess what I'm saying is we spend way too much time getting distracted on fringe ideas, and we need to recalibrate. We need to be, and we need to remain, the most singular, muscular power in the world, which comes from economic and military supremacy, which comes from only one thing, technical supremacy. So you have to find a way of enabling those 50,000 Michael Jordans that exist in America to cook. Let them cook. That's what you need to do.
I wonder if the structure of Silicon Valley or
Can I give you a different example?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, this is my last one. Do you believe, one of the big pushes in AI is in robotics.
Yeah.
And just to double click into a robot moves through these things called actuators, okay? And one of the things that actuators needs, one of the ways that they generate mechanical motion, 3D planar mechanical motion, is through the use of magnets, permanent magnets. And permanent magnets are different than the ones you and I play with or what our kids play with. They are made from these things called rare earth metals.
Yes.
And rare earths are a misnomer. They are not rare, but they are abundantly available in the earth. There is an incredible supply of rare earths in California. You could not, for the life of you, get a permit in California, no matter how clean, how green, to mine those materials to make sure that we could make magnets, so that we could make the robots, so that we maintained our technical supremacy. Right? That's how that decision, I think, should get made. We want technical supremacy in the next 5 to 10 years. There's going to be a huge wave in robotics. America needs to be at the forefront. America needs to make them. We need to understand how to program them. Our robots need to be smarter. So there's an AI track, right? There's a mechanical engineering track. Okay, well, there's a mining track. Let's get the materials. Let's make sure that we are beholden to nobody so that we can make them. By the way, these are all great paying jobs if you were able to actually get them permitted. And when push comes to shove, when it's like, yeah, get the rare earths out of the ground and make the permanent magnets, can't do it. Why? You're going to spend 13 years in permitting hell in California to try to get that done? So, and I know this, the reason I know this is that I started a business to make sure that China does not have access to the only supply of rare earths. And I initially tried to do it in California. Impossible. I invested in one business that actually had an old mine that we were able to get back online through a bankruptcy process and blah, blah, blah. But it's not nearly enough. So I went to India and I was able to get a deal done with the Indian government. And what they were able to see was the strategic rationale of making sure we had access to not only the rare earths, but to also to make sure that there were subsidies so that they would compete on the global stage cheaper than China. And now I can bring them back into the United States to make these magnets. Would I like to do that in America? Yes. Can I? Impossible. I'd be sitting around twiddling my thumbs for a decade. The guys in India did that deal with me in less than 18 months. They understand. There's an escalation point where they'll sit down and say, Chamath, what do you need? What makes sense? And I say, well, sir, here's what we're trying to do. Here's why it's important. Here's why having a global supply chain that's independent of China is just important. It's competitive. It's good for everybody. They're like, okay, great. X, Y, and Z, do the following 3 things. Build a plant over there. We'll make sure that we support you. Here, we just go into a morass and die.
I mean, can we generate, do we have the hardware to generate the electricity necessary to remain dominant in AI?
Yes. So the other crazy thing about that Biden EO is why couldn't you have just stopped the EO at that first paragraph?
Because it wouldn't include the control provisions, which are the whole point of it. We control your behavior. We give you something, but then we're in charge.
We're in charge. We have more nat gas and oil in the United States. I don't know if you saw this, Tucker, but there was a piece of data that came out this week, but our reliance on foreign oil is almost entirely gone.
Oh, yeah.
Meaning almost to where we don't even need to buy it anymore. Not just that we make more than we import, but where the imports will soon go to zero.
Yes.
That's an incredible statement about the energy independence of America. It's the single most obvious way to guarantee peace.
Well, yeah.
If you're not fighting over that critical resource, it's going to be very unlikely you're going to go to war, which if you look past the last 4 or 5 wars, the trillions of dollars and the hundreds of thousands of American lives, what were they all about? Oil. And now, we have the ability to power those data centers. So should data centers be built in a fair, predictable way on federal land? Yeah, because it feeds the technical supremacy we all need. Now, by the way, there is a conversation to be had is, okay, great. When you have all this economic abundance, how do you share it more? I get that.
Right.
But at least you're in a position to have the conversation.
That is jumping ahead.
So back to this though, but if you're able to build these things, I think what Biden should have done is just say, hey, listen, folks, do your best, get the energy because it exists, use nat gas, use oil, and we will figure it out after we've won. That feels like leadership.
Right, but he can't do that because he's surrounded by people who have already said no hydrocarbons, period. So,
but it's not rooted in any reality.
No, I'm aware. It's just...
It's rooted in moral grandstanding.
Oh, I've noticed. But I just think that if you've got mandates for net zero or mandates for no hydrocarbons, mandates for EVs, and this economic imperative around AI, I just don't, and people like air conditioning, I just don't think we're going to have enough electricity unless there's hardware built really soon.
It's incredible that you mentioned air conditioning. So back to sort of one of these ways where I was like, after 2022, how can I just get back to basics and do the things that I do well? One of the projects that I started with this incredible mechanical engineer was we set out to rebuild the air conditioner.
Yeah, good.
And when you look at air conditioners, the heat transfer mechanisms can be made much, much more efficient, and you don't have to use this horrible coolants. And so we have a working version now. It's like our second prototype. We're probably 2 years away from getting something working, but when that works, by the way, we've started a process to figure out how do we sell it. But this is, again, Tucker, it's like if I tried to sell it to a home, the number of people that want to touch that thing,
oh, I know.
It will take me an extra $150 million and an extra 150. It'll take $150 million to build it. It'll take an extra $150 million and an extra 7 years.
To comply with code.
What is it that I'm supposed to do?
And by the way, not to be pedantic, but those rules were never passed by the Congress.
I don't think those rules were passed by people, even to give them the benefit of the doubt. by 1 degree removed, folks that even have an understanding of like physics.
No, well, of course not. Of course not.
So there was probably a very smart, capable lawyer representing some smart organization who knew that this was something that they could write in to slow people down. But what people need to understand is it just slows down our ability to remain number one.
But where does this, I think you're exactly right. I think you've described it very nicely, but I'm still baffled by the motive. Why would people in a country as great as ours want to wreck the country? Where does that come from?
I don't think that they want to wreck the country as much as I think that they have lost the global context. I don't think they understand that we are in an existential risk of no longer being number one. And I think that they also don't understand the implications if we are not number one. You need to just look at the UK. If you want to have a very simple and visible picture of a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation completely losing itself, totally losing the economic war, losing the military war, losing the technology war, and fighting a fringe issue war, you need to just look there. And people should ask themselves, is that what we aspire to?
I'd rather live in Pakistan than live in the UK. I'm being serious. I think it's the most depressing country on the planet for the reasons that you just described. There's something about decline it's hard to describe, but when you're there, you feel it.
It's terrible.
It's soul.
It's so much worse. You're much better off, to your point, being in a developing nation on the come up than you are
100%.
being in a.
There are over 200,000 Brits in UAE right now.
Right.
In UAE, which they formerly controlled until not that long ago. Right. And now there's a massive outflow. There are far more Brits in the Emirates than there are Emiratis in Britain.
So the thing that we need to do, I think, as a Western set of nations, is we need to understand and agree on the fact that governance over this last decade has totally and miserably failed by focusing on these fringe issues and by losing sight of these global priorities. I'll give you a different example. At the end of the global financial crisis, Canada emerged as the healthiest G7 country out of all of us. They were doing phenomenally well, low debt to GDP, phenomenal growth. And then over those intervening 17 years, they've focused on all kinds of fringe issues. Rampant open immigration, poor allocation of risk capital inside of Canada. They've allowed this incredible flight of human capital to the United States.
Oh, yeah.
And now today, if Canada were to join the United States, it would be poorer than Alabama on a per capita basis.
Oh, yeah. And much more depressing.
So what has happened in Canada?
There's a vibe shift. When countries decline, it's not simply a matter of GDP moving in the wrong direction. It's the spirit of the country is palpably different and sad. I mean, it's why so many Canadians accept their government's invitation to kill them through the MAIDS program. Like their suicide rate is insane. Why is that? That's not a measure, that's a sign of health or vigor or ascendance. That's a sign of, terminal decline. It's like shocking. You're from there. When you go back, what does it feel like?
My dad passed away 10 years ago. My mom now comes to see us, so I rarely go back. Actually, I'm going to be back in February for a little bit. I've always felt like a fish out of water in Canada.
Yeah.
I've loved it for many reasons. I think that it had some principles back then that I think are very legitimate and I think should exist in the United States. The most important being a capped cost of higher education. I spent $12,000 a year to get an electrical engineering degree from a place called the University of Waterloo, which globally is as good, frankly, better than MIT. If I had to be in the United States, and if I had gotten into MIT, which I probably would not have, but had I been able to, I'd be $100,000 or $200,000 in debt. And so had I not had this lottery ticket for me pay off with an IPO and working at Facebook, I don't know where I would be today. That's crazy. So there are things that Canada, I think, and we should acknowledge that, does really right. That is probably the most important thing that it does right. And I think the idea of a state-sponsored healthcare system, it's implemented horribly poorly. But there are elements of that where I think especially around sort of capped costs, which I think are important. Meaning, in the United States, a healthcare CEO was telling me, when you look inside of an EMR system, the electronic medical care system, let's say, Tucker, you're a doctor and you did a knee surgery, you would have 100 different prices attached to you, depending on the plan, depending on the insurer. That's dumb. You are one person. Those are one set of hands.
Exactly.
That's one surgery.
No, it's right.
It's one quality. The idea that one person is lucky enough to pay $1,000 deductible and the other person has to pay $50,000 is an egregious market failure. It's just egregious. So Tucker Carlson, the best knee surgeon in America, if he charges $2,000, then he charges $2,000 for everybody. That seems fair.
It does seem fair. It seems much more efficient. I just can't.
Now, everything else in Canada is broken, I think, but those two ideas.
Well, their healthcare system is a disaster.
Well, the implementation then of the system.
So my question is, it's like one of those things that I'm not against it in theory, but I can't think of. National health system doesn't work. The Canadian healthcare system doesn't work. Is there a working national healthcare system?
Yes, I think that you need to have competition. I think you need to have. There's a hybrid that the United States could implement that is not NHS or the Canadian system, but it's not just a pure free market, free for all. It's a little bit in between. And let me describe what the in-between parts are. Medicare is an incredibly important insurance program in the United States. I think it stands to reason that Medicare should have its own PBM. If Medicare was able to negotiate an extremely aggressive price for drugs, it sets the boundary for what is allowable for everybody else. And for folks that are 65 and older, then now they have a very viable alternative to use that. It also creates transparency around the variation in pricing, number one. Number two, there needs to be a way where a private insurer can build up some credit for doing things today that may only pay off for that employee in the future when he's no longer an employee. So for example, you worked at Fox. Should the Fox insurance program have put you on a statin, I'm making this up, have put you on a statin in your early 40s to help you manage your, I'm not saying you have rising cholesterol, but if you had that, because in 10 or 15 years from now, it would help a potential cardiac arrest or heart attack.
Yeah.
A lot of the companies that are faced with this decision today say, we're not going to do that because you may not be an employee in 15 years. So why am I paying now for something where I get the benefit then? But that's a simple healthcare economics market solution. We should have those. We should give private insurers incentives to, in some cases, maybe the right thing to do is to put people on Ozempic and Mounjaro. Do the work now. I understand that employee may be retired by the time that, they may need that. But it was the right thing to do for that person for having worked for you for 15 or 20 years. Another thing, with AI today, you can read all of these insurance plans, and you should have a standard way of knowing that a condition is going to get approved or not before it starts. And that needs to be auditable. It cannot be where you need like a PhD and 5 different people to read these insurance plans, and then all of a sudden a random person can make an economic decision to say no. That's also where, simple technology can get built to build very strict guardrails. What is approved? What is not approved? Have it be known, have it be auditable, be in a log so that, people can just simply escalate. Hey, that person got his approved and mine was dinged. Why? So there's all these little things to make the system better. It needs to be more open. You need to have, for example, on the case of open, it is highly unlikely that you've ever tried to get all of your healthcare data. Impossible. Now you would say, Chamath, why would I need that? Well, maybe there's an AI agent that can actually be your doctor in your pocket that just works for Tucker. It's the person that is constantly reading my every interaction with the healthcare system to tell me what they think. It's my own second opinion. That's not a bad idea. That's a very low-cost thing to do, except you can't get the data. Why can't you get the data? Because there's federal regulations and most people don't listen to them. Federal regulations, TEFCA says, you have to be able to download your data. These companies make it very hard because they know the more open it becomes, it induces competition.
Exactly.
Competition that will show up will probably be infinitely better. So I'm going to do everything I can to block it. And, the federal and state governments don't do enough.
In America, we do things a little differently, and we always have. When the British said, hey, we're going to tax your favorite morning beverage, the Revolutionary Sons of Liberty said no, and they poured the entire shipment of tea into Boston Harbor and created a new country, a country based on personal choice and freedom. Well, 251 years later, it is time to throw something else overboard, your overpriced big wireless contract. You don't need it. Do you need to pay $100 a month just to get a free phone? I don't think so. The cell phone company we use, Pure Talk, says no to all of this inflated prices, the BS, the contracts you can't understand, and instead gives you service that you need, that you actually need. With Pure Talk, it's super straightforward. You get unlimited talk, text, 25 gigs of data, mobile hotspot at a fraction of the price. And with a qualifying plan of just $45 a month, they'll throw a free Samsung Galaxy your way. So you get everything and you know exactly what it is. It's not designed to deceive you. We strongly recommend it. Pure Talk provides the same coverage as the other guys. It's just a lot more affordable and a lot more straightforward. You can find it for yourself. Visit puretalk.com/Tucker. Make the switch today. Pure Talk, America's wireless company. So you said AI can be used to make sense of, like the Talmud of health insurance regulations. What, looking down the next 5 years, name 3 or 4 innovations that you're pretty certain we're going to see, life enhancers from AI.
I start companies.
Yeah.
But when I don't see something that I think I can start right away and there's somebody that's a little bit in the lead, I'll just invest and I'll just take a large piece so that I can help guide them. One of those businesses where I'm the largest shareholder has been working on breast cancer surgery. And today across America, for every 10 women that go and get diagnosed with breast cancer, 3 of the surgeries leave cancer behind.
Ouch.
And the way that it works is you go in for what's called, so there's 2 different kinds of breast cancer surgery. There's a lumpectomy, which is take out the lump, or a mastectomy, which is take out the entire breast. And in the lumpectomy, you visualize with your own eyes, whether you think most of the cancer is gone, you close up the woman and you take that sample, you give it to a pathologist, and typically between 7 and 11 days, which is how long it takes because they're clogged up and there's backlog, they'll look under a microscope and visually inspect and say, actually, sorry, 30% of the time they say you left some cancer behind. So now those 3 women have to go back. They get another surgery. But again, 30% error rate. They do it again. And then one of those women gets dinged. So now one woman has had 3 breast cancer surgeries.
Oh.
That is happening today. Now, if you go to a really, really good teaching hospital, that error rate will be 5% because the docs are incredible. If you go to an overly zealous doctor, that error rate will also be low, but you'll come in for a lumpectomy, you'll end up with a mastectomy kind of a thing. They'll just take out so much of that, and that creates a disfiguration. So this company basically says, hold on a second, I'll just use AI. I'll look right down to the granular microscopic level. I'll take an extremely high-res picture. My brain will be trained on only this one task. Is there cancer or is there no cancer? So we built it, and it's in a bunch of the leading hospitals in America. But we had to file with the FDA to be allowed to tell the doctor. Right? So I just want to be clear. We know, we can see it. And so we ran a 18-month trial, cost us 10 or 15 million bucks. And we met our endpoint in November. We can now absolutely be sure that the cancer was removed or not removed. Now we have to package all of that up. We've filed it with the FDA. We've been told we'll get approval by June, and then we'll be able to sell, meaning sell this software upgrade. So that essentially in the operating room, instead of having to wait for the pathologist 7 to 11 days later, the doctor will do the lumpectomy, put it in the machine, and instantly you'll say, Tucker, you need to take out a little bit more. The margins are not right. Tucker, perfect job. Close her up. That's using AI.
While the patient is sedated?
Yeah.
Wow.
That is using AI, and that can get breast cancer surgeries to be so prolifically good that the error rate goes to 0. The impact on the quality of life of those women, and then by extension, their families, their kids that have to deal with that stress as well, can go away. So that's a profound impact of AI that you're going to see in the next year. We could quibble that this should have been faster, it could have cost a lot less money, meaning it cost me the same amount of money to get this trial done as it cost that Chinese company to build a digital brain that's as good as OpenAI or Facebook. That's crazy, but whatever. Crazy. Okay, put a pin in it. We did it. We'll file and we'll move forward. You know, we play the rules that are on the field, even if the rules make no sense, and it's hard to tell anybody change the rules, but it is what it is. That's an example. Elon published some data yesterday, which is incredibly profound, which is he has an AI brain inside of the Tesla, and the ability to drive safely on the highway became 7.5x better than his previous version. And his previous version was already 10 times better than a normal car, which means when you get on the highway, you engage FSD, it's called, his version of autopilot for the car. And it was already 10 times better. Now it's 7 times better than that 10 times to not get into an accident. So the idea about using AI now to just eliminate all the unnecessary deaths that happen because of traffic mishaps, there's the potential where that goes to 0. That's today as well. Again, his issue isn't technological. His issue is going to be regulatory. At what speed will people be able to be comfortable letting him take people from point A to point B? In yet a different example, there are all of these small airplane companies. They're called eVTOL. So it's not a plane, not a helicopter, but it's kind of this hybrid thing in between. And they have this autopilot where it's like taking off with in a no pilot configuration, piloting it in the air, which is much simpler, by the way, than driving on the ground, and then landing. And you have the ability to now just create a level of transportation which increases GDP. And that is an AI brain that's calculating all the system variables around itself, being able to fly safely, getting from point A to point B. You don't have to drive 7 hours. It's a 40-minute hop, skip, and a jump now. So now go and do your job and come back. All of these things are happening right now. We are gated on the regulatory machine, which are unfortunately not filled with enough actual technologists. It's mostly bureaucrats, teaching them, getting them comfortable that, you know, what do we intend with all of this? We intend of reversing this lost decade. We just want to get to work and build a thing so that America kicks ass.
David Sachs, your co-host, is now the AI czar, also crypto.
Amazing.
Well, it is amazing. And I'll just say
he is an amazing human being. No, he really is. Like, he is a guy.
I agree.
I had to teach Sachs how to hug properly.
How did it? Can you show me how you did that?
You know, Sachs was a side hugger, which I can't.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's like, I'm not a side hugger.
Yeah.
You're going to give me a hug. And we've been, you know, really, really close friends for 20 years now. So it's like, bro, learn to hug. And we have all of these videos where, like, over the course of like 4 years, you know, I had to take his arm and teach how
you did video training.
Oh yeah. Like, I had to teach him how to with him and me, you know, his wife would take a video. And it's like, Sachs, you got to put your arm this way. And then he's like, okay, now you have to, you know, put your head over here. He is a brilliant guy.
So you taught Sachs how to hug.
Yeah, I mean, he taught me everything else, but I taught him how to hunt.
So your show, All In, I did it last year. I did it because David asked me, and I love David. I had no sense of its penetration. I had no idea. I'm not in business. I'm not in technology. You know, I drive a stick shift. I'm kind of the opposite of that. And I just didn't realize.
Everybody watches.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. It's unbelievable. I heard from people I hadn't seen since early childhood. I heard from I was stunned by it. So what's that like for you? You're obviously well known in Silicon Valley, Facebook, and your investment business, but I mean, it's a much larger audience in Silicon Valley. So what has that been like?
I mean, I think it's made me much cooler for my older kids, my teenagers. You know, they use these words which I just can't stand, but they're like, you know, if somebody comes up and says hi and we take a picture, they're like, Dad, that was some good riz, or, you know, they'll be like, yeah, that was okay, good aura, Dad, good aura. And so we make fun of it. Like, you know, I will turn to them and I'll be like in the car, I'll be like, guys, shut up. You know, they'll be making a lot of noise. They're like, why? And then I'll turn up, because I'm a very important podcaster. So we get.
Did you expect that when you? So like most of the people on the podcast, maybe all are, you know, don't need to be doing podcasts. You're not doing it for the money, obviously.
Right.
So this starts as like for fun, or how did you end up doing that?
It actually started because our poker game, me, Sachs, J. Cal, Freeberg, the 4 co-hosts, we were 4 of the kind of like the regular everyday players. When the COVID shelter in place happened, we weren't allowed to go out. And so we started to Zoom each other, and then we just started to record, and then we just threw it up on YouTube. Because we would ask Freeberg to teach us about the disease and the science of it all. Then, you know, we would all take turns riffing on how frustrated we were at Newsom. And then we would kind of post it. And then it just took on a life of its own. And yeah, fast forward 4 years. I mean, we've done, you know, an episode a week. I think we got very lucky because it happened in a moment. I think you and Joe Rogan are 2 of the more leading examples of this, but the traditional media is totally dead.
Yes.
There was a stat today. The Washington Post's traffic in the last 4 years has gone from 20.5 million viewers to 3. Isn't that incredible?
That's
20.5 million monthly users to 3 million. So the question is, in that vacuum, it's not as if the American population shrank. It's grown.
No.
What is the sense making?
Or news stopped happening. Actually, much more is happening.
Or did news? Yeah, exactly. More news is happening. So I think it's important to rebuild the sense making. And I think we accidentally found ourselves making sense of things that are happening to people. Like, explain this technology thing, explain this business thing, explain this political thing, not necessarily so deeply, but connecting the dots so that you could have a slightly better worldview. And I think that that's been helpful for people. It's been really fun for me.
Well, apparently. And then Trump comes on.
I mean, he is really incredible. You know, I didn't know what to expect. And then David and I threw a fundraiser for him. I mean, I think part of where all of this started was David called me in June. So actually, taking a step back, he and I had always been active in politics. He was he was a tried and true conservative.
Yes.
From the beginning. I was a little bit more promiscuous. I didn't really understand how to make my political beliefs fit into one of these vessels. But for the most part, in the last few years, like everybody else, I got lulled into buying into a lot of the Democratic lines. And I was a large donor to the Democrats. And it all started to unravel for me in 2020 because I didn't understand COVID. Then I got the, vaccine only to realize that it was, not a vaccine. And I was really upset. A couple of my kids really struggled with what happened to them by not being able to go to school. And I was like, why hasn't the government intervened and gotten my kids back in school? All of these things just made me super frustrated. So I started to question, maybe I wasn't seeing things right. And maybe I was, reacting more with my ego. And the answer was, yeah, actually, the Democrats are extremely charming. And they can play a very sophisticated game where they make you feel exclusive.
Oh, for sure.
And that's part of the shtick of how they get money from you. I mean, I remember, and I would tell these stories as a point of pride. Now I tell it as a warning to myself. I was sitting at dinner with Obama the day of Brexit. And that very famous kind of moment where Andrew Card passes that piece of paper to George Bush?
Yes.
There was a version of that moment, obviously much less important, but where somebody—
Summer of 16.
Yeah, where somebody passes a note to Obama and he goes, oh my, this was we were in San Francisco and it was at 8 or 9 p.m. and he's like, oh wow, the UK just voted to leave. So I remember where I was that day. But those kinds of moments made me feel that maybe I was doing the right thing, right? And then all of my businesses just kept running up against these brick walls over and over and over again. Every time I tried to do something good that I thought was valuable, it would bump up against all of this stupid regulation and slowed back. And every time I looked at who they were all supposedly on the same team that I was in. So I said, forget this. I have to start from first principles. So in 2023, and Sachs and I decided we were going to start throwing fundraisers for a whole variety of candidates. So the first one was at his house. We threw a fundraiser for RFK. We got to meet Bobby. It was exhilarating. And, for the first time, you had this person speaking truth to power. Then at my house, we threw a fundraiser for Vivek. David and I did that together. And then David called me and said, let's do a fundraiser for Trump. And I said, absolutely. And I think that started the—
Did you check with your wife first?
Yeah,
That's quite a statement.
She's very supportive.
Yeah.
My wife, she's in the life sciences business. But, she's always been like, you have to make these decisions not from how other people will perceive you, but what do you feel? And she's like, explain to me Bobby Kennedy, explain to me Vivek, explain to me Donald Trump in your own words that isn't tied to, well, here's what other people will think of me if I do this. And then when I did that, she was like, okay, let's do it. Let's do it. And I mean, Trump was unbelievably true.
But at the time, because I sort of understand the cultural context in which
it was a very tough moment.
Kind of ballsy.
It was very ballsy. People, I got the amount of hate text messages. I should have kept some of them. They're probably still on my phone actually. But people were very mad. And part of, I think, why they were mad is they were afraid. Meaning there was a lie that Biden was sharp as a tack. And myself and David had not really dismantled the lie beyond just saying it looks like a lie. And I think that they were worried that it would create, I think what Peter Thiel calls this, which I really agree with, is a preference cascade.
Yes, that's right.
Peter is a genius, but he is on an island many years ahead of the rest of us. Then there are other people, like me and David to some degree, who are also sort of we can kind of see the patterns, not nearly as fast as a Peter, but then we do a decent job of translating it for other folks. So I think people were afraid if these guys translate their interactions with Donald Trump into the truth, it's going to tip a lot of people. And they were right. Because when Trump came, wow, I mean,
Had you met him before, by the way?
He had called me. So I'd had a telephone conversation. So I knew what he was like on the phone. That's when I knew I'd made a mistake before about believing what the press was saying. That's where I went back and I looked at the Charlottesville press conference and I looked at all of them again after my phone call. When the president called me, I was like, hold on a second. This man was incredibly charming, polite, kind. He just what I honestly thought, Tucker, I called my wife, I was like, he was raised by really good parents. That's what I said to them. That's what I said to my wife. Because you can tell in your kids, when you see kids around and there are some, they are polite, they're kind, they make eye contact.
Yes.
There's these, I don't want to call them simple, but there are these building blocks of being a human being that you need to be taught by your parents. he was taught. And I have tremendous respect for that. So then when I saw him at David's house, I mean, it's pretty incredible. Like it's a larger than life figure. And he's extemporaneous. He talks for an hour and a half. He's going all over the place. He's doing the weave, it's incredible. And so I was,
and he's hilarious too.
He's very funny.
Yes.
Which is really hard to be, actually.
Yes.
And so I walked away thinking, wow, I had got it totally wrong. And I was lied to. And I believed at a very superficial level what the mainstream media was saying. And then I did even more research. I read the lawsuits. And it was just the amount of contortion that people were going through to try to prevent this man from getting into power made me want him to be in power even more.
Yes. Right.
Because I thought they're afraid of something. That's something they're not going to say out loud. But that is the thing that we need to exercise from the U.S. government.
Yes.
That thing that they want to protect.
Nicely put. That's right. It's not even now clear exactly. It's disclosure of some kind. They fear being, revealed. But yeah, that's as far as.
And then different from his first time around, the caliber of the people around him. It's like the '92 Barcelona, dream team. As far as I can tell, I mean, like, my gosh, like, you get Elon, you get Vivek, you get RFK, you get Tulsi, you get all of these people. Howard Lutnick. David Sachs, Scott Bessent. This is amazing.
I want to tell you about an amazing documentary series from our friend Sean Stone called All the President's Men, The Conspiracy Against Trump. It is a series of interviews with people at the very heart of the first Trump term, many of whom are close to the heart of the second Trump term. This is their stories about what permanent Washington tried to do to them, in many cases send them to prison, for the crime of supporting Donald Trump. Their words have never been more relevant than they are now. Steve Bannon, Kash Patel, I'm in there even. All the President's Men, The Conspiracy Against Trump, and you will find it only on tcntuckercarlson.com. Highly recommend it. So what is the view? I remember vividly the day that you all had that fundraiser for Trump and thinking, this is, I never thought I would live to see this. This is like a major change, major change. Was there a major change in attitudes in Silicon Valley toward Trump after that?
After that, yeah, because it gave permission. David is very complimentary to me in that, because I was a little bit more promiscuous and not necessarily just a straight hardline Republican.
Yep.
It was a little bit more valuable,
yep,
I think, for that cohort of people, because they could kind of say, oh, well, if it's, Chamath said it, oh, then yeah, sure. But I think that he probably took a lot of heat as well. And more than that, what he did was he then said, I'm really going to put my foot on the gas here. And he's great at this, which is just like, I'm going to tip the preference cascade. So then he went to the Republican convention. He spoke. He, he did a lot. And his wife did a lot. That's a real dynamic power couple, those two.
And then Mark Andreessen came out.
And it was funny, like the Andreessen thing was a little bit interesting. I don't think the full details, so I'm just speculating, but it did turn out that his partner also gave like $50 or $100 million to Kamala, which I suspect then that Mark probably gave $50 or $100 million to Trump.
It looked like they were splitting it, yeah.
Yeah.
So what was it like though, living there, living in among the people you work with and have worked with? Like, how did people treat you?
There was an initial part where people do this,
Yeah.
It's like and I felt that because I'm very sensitive to that.
Yes.
And my feelings get hurt.
Yes.
And I get super annoyed by it. I think you call it the private equity wives. For me, it was like the private equity husbands as well. They all
that's really shameful.
They all just like kind of like a scowl. And then after the election, it was more like and I'm like, what changed?
Well, I've felt that across the country. How would you describe that?
I think a lot of people are not necessarily fighting a moral or ideological battle, Tucker. I think people are just trying to get from one day to the next day.
For sure.
And I respect that. At first I was hurt by it because I didn't understand it. And I thought, again, it goes back to, oh, I'm worthless. Like, is there something about me? Is that why you're rejecting me?
Yes.
And then I realized it has nothing to do with me. This person is just, today is a day, tomorrow is a day. And they're not fighting these battles. Doesn't make them better nor worse. It's just a different. For me, I'm caught up in my own head about having to do something a little bit more ideological and morally rooted because I need that so that I feel like there's purpose.
Of course.
Not everybody's built that way. And I wasn't built that way.
Well, and people are distracted by their day-to-day concerns also.
And I think that that's very fair. So, I kind of leave it to them as what they are. I think it's good that their minds are open and their eyes are open. So the way that this is going to be really tested now is what's happening in California. If you look at the Palisades, which is an incredibly affluent area.
Yeah, beautiful place.
Beautiful place. And has just been decimated. And several of my very good friends lost their homes there. They were tried and true Democrats. It didn't matter what the candidate's name was beside the box in the ballot. They checked it and they moved on. And now the real test for them is, what do they do? Will they look through the label and actually look at the policies and ask, did these help or hurt me? All of these things that I give money to, all these NGOs and nonprofits, did they help or hurt me? California has a $322 billion a year budget. Do I, as a taxpayer who pays some of the highest taxes in the nation, have a right to ask where that money is being spent? And if the answer to all those questions is, it doesn't matter, check the box, then we deserve what we get in California. But it can be much better. Because today the state is totally broken. We have lost the script. We don't prioritize California's economic supremacy, nor its technological supremacy. That is a huge mistake when you look at the number of companies that have left the state. Oracle, Tesla, Chevron. I mean, this is not like just fringe businesses.
No.
These are the businesses that matter. And they're voting with their feet.
Well, I mean, it does feel like the tipping point is here, though. I mean, you said that
I would not underestimate the Democratic machine. It's a cartel that runs that state.
Oh, I know.
And Gavin Newsom is extremely charismatic.
Mm-hmm.
And he is able to convince people of things that are just not true. And so he is fighting for his political life. He definitely wants to be on the national stage. And so the real question is he able to convince enough people that this was the environment and that these wins came out of nowhere? Or will it be laid bare at his feet that it was just a lack of skill, intellectual rigor, and distraction and negligence and incompetence that caused this fire?
I mean, I think you make a pretty strong case for the latter.
I found that there were 3 bills that started in the legislature that were either approved by the legislature and were then vetoed by Newsom or were then pulled down by the legislature itself. This is like Democrats on Democrat violence. To just give a waiver to all of these local municipalities to go and clear the brush. Just that, clear the brush. Now, would that have stopped the fire? No, I get that it wouldn't have stopped the fire, but the intensity of a fire is directly proportional to the energy load that you give it.
To the fuel, of course.
So take away some of the fuel and the fire will be less. And if we can't even admit that plain truth, this is what I mean by, if we're going to continue to just lie to ourselves because we care so much about this failed ideology, then California is going to just continue to just degrade.
But there's a point, I mean, you see the same thing in New York City where if the engines of the economy leave, because it is a country with 50 states, there's a point where the math doesn't work and things just decline so quickly that it's hard to recover.
The thing, it is true, but the thing that is important to keep in mind about California is sometimes you get lucky. And we have to acknowledge our luck, but not fritter it away. Specifically in California, there is a critical mass of these 50,000 Michael Jordan engineers.
Yes.
You cannot rebuild Silicon Valley by casting it to the four winds. Some people go to Peoria, Illinois. Some people end up in Boston. Some are in Miami. Some are in Las Vegas. Some are in Austin. All fine and good. But that is not the place or the way to create the technical vibrancy we need to generate technical supremacy. You need these people close and around you so that they're cross-pollinating from each other. Of course. And this is, again, why hasn't the state realized that? That is an incredibly critical resource.
Well, at this point, with the decline of ag and the entertainment business and aerospace, I don't really know what drives the economy of California other than technology.
Well, right now, if you look at California's employment, the employment picture is quite scary because it is government jobs that are convoluting how healthy the actual state is.
Right.
So if you take away the government jobs, but at the end of the day, what do government bureaucrats do? They want to govern. How do they do that? They're going to legislate or they're going to regulate. Where is that felt? It's felt on private industry and private citizens. But eventually, at the limit, the amount of regulation goes to infinity and they're legislating themselves into oblivion.
Right.
Nobody will be there to legislate, to be governed by all of this insanity. Because everybody will leave. And first, the people that leave are the people that can leave. Then the people that leave are the people that have to leave. And we're in the first part. It's clear that people
Do you know people who've left?
Many.
Have you thought about it?
Yeah. I mean, look, again, I'll tell you in terms of my poker game, half of those people that have been my lifelong friends for 20 years have left. Half.
Where'd they go?
Austin, Miami.
Texas and Florida, yeah.
Yeah, Texas and Florida. And it's just so frustrating. And they've left because they can't build things. The taxes were like secondary. One of my friends left because, one of their children went through, a bit of an identity crisis, if you want to call it that. And,
yes.
And the police showed up and wanted to, take the kid away. So that the kid could go through like a transition that the kid ultimately decided they didn't want to go through.
The police showed up?
Yeah. That's the law in California.
So like encourage it.
I'm not sure if it's to encourage it, but my understanding of the way this works is if you as a child have these issues, and you escalate that, there's a requirement for the school to basically call Child Protective Services, who may or may not call the police, who may or may not come to your house and try to take the kid away. So
they're not your children in California is basically what they're saying.
Well, they're your children to the point where the government believes that they know better.
Man, that's just, any government that presumes to know better than parents is an out of control, scary government.
Look, I try to think of myself as a good parent. I try to do the best I can.
Yeah.
Do I make mistakes? Yeah, sure. But am I generally more, better for my kids than some other random adult? Also, yeah.
Yeah, strongly.
Right. And so like the idea that just some random person in an office somewhere can read some piece of paper and all of a sudden take your kids away, that's very scary. It's very scary. It makes me feel very insecure, that idea.
What's keeping you there?
I'm very stubborn and I feel very grateful. I feel very grateful to America. I feel very grateful to California. It gave me a path that I would not have had anywhere else. And so I have a responsibility to stay and fix it.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I feel guilty that I left. Because it's the prettiest state. Nothing comes close. So to get driven out of where you grew up and where your ancestors lived is it's bitter, but I did it. So does it change? Does the state change? It's a one-party state. Clearly it's enormously corrupt, as you know, and wasteful. And now it's fallen down on its most basic obligation, which is to keep your house from burning down.
Exactly.
So does that force change politically?
I think people need to force the change now. It has to force change. People have to understand that these labels mean nothing. Meaning,
yeah,
you could have the smartest person in the world and the dumbest person in the world. You cannot vote for the dumbest person in the world just because the label beside them is something you've been told is wrong.
Well, exactly.
That is just the height of stupidity. It's not what you're allowed to do as an adult. Adults aren't allowed to do that. Your kids can do that.
Right.
And you're supposed to teach your kids that that's not how you make decisions when you're an adult.
On the basis of labels, brands.
It's so stupid.
It's childish.
There are some really competent people that are in that state that will try now to come out of the woodwork to do the right thing, to deregulate California. California has 60,000 regulations on the books. It was 10,000 less than a decade ago. Go back to 10,000. Go to 5,000. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of the breast cancer thing that could get to market faster? Are you afraid that Elon's, autopilot can now save people's lives more? Are you afraid that, we can catch rockets and then send them back to the stars and the heavens and Mars? Why is that bad?
Well, the point of regulation is to encourage, guarantee health and safety. And growing up in California, it was a healthy state. It was the healthiest state, as far as I could tell, and it was a very safe state. And it's neither one of those things. It's one of the least healthy states. Actually, there's more poverty in California than any state. Autism rates are the highest in the country, and it's dangerous in a lot of ways. So, it's not working. I guess that's what I would say. The regulations aren't working. This is my point.
It's not working. So, how long do well-heeled Democratic voters need to see their state run over, need to see their lives ruined, and now their kids' lives ruined? And maybe this is the thing that actually.
Well, you tell me. You live among them. Do you see the change coming?
So, not where I live, because
Really?
the only damage that has ever happened in Silicon Valley is economic damage, but then it's righted itself.
Right.
And so people just go and move along blindly in the orthodoxy. It's only when your business is at risk where you'll flip. So, you've seen kind of like Meta have a total, come to Jesus moment.
Yeah, what's that? Have you talked to Zuckerberg about it?
No, Mark and I gave this speech at Stanford in 2016, which went pretty viral, which kind of laid bare what was going on in social media. And he and I have not spoken since.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, knowing him as you do, and for as long as you have, what do you make of his Joe Rogan appearance?
I think it's a calculation to manage the conditions on the field. Meaning, what I said on the pod is all you need to know are two things. One is there's an incredible picture in Donald Trump's book, which is a picture of Zuck sitting in the Oval. And by the way, this is the same book, which you have to get. It's the book where he talks about, Trudeau's mom kind of casting about with the Rolling Stones and
not
Trudeau,
just casting about, rolling about.
Yeah, rolling about and he's like Fidel Castro's love child. Anyways, but in that book is a picture of Zuck and it says, Zuck was the nicest guy to my face, but then would, work against me to turn over the election. And, I've made it very clear that if he tries to do anything like that again, he'll go to prison for the rest of his life. That's what Trump says in the caption. And then he was asked about that last week, the exact same day that Meta changed their policies. And he said, do you think it was in response to what you said? And the president said, probably. So I think it's a very smart but necessary set of calculations, but I think they are calculations.
So what are his highest values? What are his first principles?
Zuck?
Yep.
I mean, I'd only be guessing.
But an informed guess since you know him.
I think that I think that he's a very big fan of the Roman Empire. If I had to translate and guess how that manifests in his day-to-day decision-making, I think he thinks of things empirically, meaning as an empire. And he has an empire. He has Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Messenger. These are institutional worldwide products. In the digital sphere, he is Rome. And so I think that he cares about the propagation of that empire, probably more than he cares about any philosophical trends per se. Because, the empire endures if you can, manage the vicissitudes of trends.
That's right.
So when the trend was under the Democrats to build a censorship machine, you do that. And then when the trend is to do the opposite, you'll do the opposite.
But he said to me a number of times and over a number of years, off camera, but has said, basically I'm a kind of 70s liberal and I really believe in free speech. You think that's true?
Sure. I think that's not the question.
Apparently not.
He has, he controls Facebook with an iron fist. He has complete voting control. He has less economic participation, but he has absolute power. And that was the justification in some ways of explaining how he made these changes now. It doesn't explain why it veered in the other direction then. And I think it's important to just probably get the answer to that, and then you'll know where he stands. Meaning the economic power has ebbed and flowed, but the absolute power has never changed. So, the philosophy that he believed in then, if it's the same now, then the question is, well, why did the manifestation of that power change?
Well, he's basically said, I was bullied by the national security state.
I can believe that too, by the way. I'm sympathetic to that. I mean, that's got to feel like a lot of pressure when you're a young guy on the come up and a bunch of these well-heeled politicos show up at your office and say, bend the knee.
Why don't you go fuck yourself? That's what I would say. Maybe that's why I'm not a billionaire. But it's like unbelievable that happens in this country. It's like shocking.
There are billionaires that have said, go fuck yourself.
Yeah, I know Elon.
And they've become even more successful as a result.
Well,
so
the richest man in the world did that. So what is his role in Elon's role in the new administration, do you think?
I think he's the heartbeat. Here's what I mean by that. I've thought about this. It is the most important temperature check that we are going to make the changes that Donald Trump wants. Meaning, I think the president, in some ways, is the most powerful job, but I think this second term, he's more of a vessel in the sense that he's got all of these great field generals who can now run the plays. And of all the field generals, the one that has just an incremental more degree of freedom to also communicate openly and continuously with the public is him. So you'll get a sense of whether there's an arrhythmia by just monitoring his X feed. You'll also get a sense of whether there's like if the drumbeat is building. I think you get a sense of that from Elon as well. I think he's the heartbeat.
So do you think that Elon's X feed is a kind of pretty accurate window into what he's thinking?
Yeah, and that's what's so powerful. And this is why I think, when you compare and contrast Zuck with Elon, I think Zuck is like every other CEO. And Elon is just a complete singular outlier in the sense that there is no book that would have told you just tell the truth grounded in your morality from day one and just burn the boats. That old Cortez line, right?
Of course.
And people would have said, what? And so whatever he's felt, he's shared in complete truth and candor. No other CEO has ever done that, and probably no one will ever will, because you can't do it as a strategy. And you can't implement it on day 17 or day 1004. It's you either are or you're not. And so he sets a way of behavior that future CEOs should emulate. But we also have to a little bit give a break and cut some slack to everybody else because they're just never going to do as good a job as him in doing that.
How was he seen in Silicon Valley?
Oh, he's a star. But he's a kind guy. you know him as well. But
yes.
This I think that people should know this. This is he's a kind guy. He's he's a beautiful person. He's a kind guy. I don't know what to say.
Has any American ever had this much power?
Gosh. Meaning the intersection of private and public industry kind of thing?
Yeah, I can't think of. Of course, the president has the power to launch nuclear weapons, so that trumps all power. But as a private citizen, a non-president, I can't think of any time in 250 years where an American has had as much power as Elon Musk has. In the sense that, he's the most successful businessman by many measures. He runs the most powerful media outlet in the world, which is X. And he has, this mandate from the newly elected president of the United States to change the government. I mean, nothing like that has ever happened that I know of.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, I guess so. I guess it hasn't happened.
Why did he buy X? Because as a business decision, it's kind of hard to justify.
Well, there's it happened in a moment where I think that there was the intersection of a lot of free speech issues. And I just think there was some, stuff that I'm not going to get into, but personal stuff, I think probably in his own life. And it just made him question, what are these philosophies? What are these ideologies? And how destructive are they if we can't question things and talk out loud? And so we all got very lucky. He paid the personal, this is what I mean, but everybody can be wow, it's so easy. It must be amazing. It's not so that's I would crumble under the weight of that. I don't think I'm capable of that. I know that about myself.
It's not easy at all.
My God. And the price you pay, the personal price you pay, I couldn't do it. I think he's a unique person that way. His capacity for pain, his capacity for just the sheer drudgery, it's incredible. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I guess in this context, I've been around two of these incredible figures. Mark, I worked in the trenches with. Elon, I've, seen now for 15 plus years. And when you think about those two, with Elon, there's just an incredible intellectual curiosity, an incredible amount of ability to suffer pain and suffering. And yet he's incredibly kind. I don't know. How?
He also seems to, I don't understand how he does everything. How do you tweet that much, run that many companies, also have that many children, also, he's a gamer, I guess. How does that work?
Yeah, I agree. As
a scheduling matter.
I know, exactly. I got here last night, ate at the Pink Elephant, and went to bed. And I felt guilty. I thought, shouldn't I be doing more yesterday? I really thought that. And I saw my email kind of piling up. And I used you as an excuse. Oh, I have to be fresh for Tucker. Good night. That's what I did. So you're right. And then I think, okay, I'm operating across an investment portfolio and one company that I run very intensely. How do you do that multiplied by 7 and all of these other, I don't know how you do it. I really don't know, Tucker. I wish that there was an answer, but I also think it's not the right thing to answer in the sense that we're all going to give some glib answer and then everybody's going to try to run and copy it. And I think what you forget is he is the product of 20 years of preparation. He started with one company. Then he started 2 companies. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
So these are reps upon reps upon reps upon reps over decades. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. That is a level of skill. He is demonstrating human peak level performance. It's easier to observe it in maybe an athlete or something else, but that's what he's demonstrating. He is at the peak of human intellect. That is the brain unencumbered by all the other stuff that maybe a lot of us get caught up in.
Well, that's the other thing is he's given up possessions effectively.
Great idea.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's not. I've never.
He tweeted out like there's all these things I never tell him these things, but there are things that that's why I follow him, because part of it is I get things from him in Twitter that really profoundly affect my life. So when I was going through all of that turbulence in 2022, he tweeted out, I think it was in 21, I can't remember when it was, but he's like, I've just sold all my homes and possessions. And I went back immediately I thought of, that is the one thing that I was taught as a Buddhist when I was raised Buddhist. And despite all the stuff and all the anger that I had, and I never thought that Buddhism was all that effective or useful for me, I took one lesson: detach yourself from the physical world.
Yes.
And I saw it and I connected that dot to myself and I said, I am the opposite of that.
It's totally true.
I am totally attached to the physical world.
I keep a verse on my phone. I'm not a great Bible scholar, hardly, but I do keep this verse because I think it actually, it's 1 John 3. Do not love this world nor the things it offers you, for when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you. For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, and a pride in our achievements and possessions.
Right.
These are from the world, and the world is fading away along with everything that people crave.
There you go.
Christian, not Buddhist, but same idea and true.
Same idea. And so he tweets that out. He sold all of his houses. He sells all of his possessions. And I'm like, what am I doing? I'm buying more.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, let me take delivery of this thing and this other thing, and now I have to hire people to manage the things. And I'm like, what am I doing?
Yes.
So that helped me a lot. I never told, but yeah, these things. So he is an incredible, I think, guidepost on how to clarify your own intentions. If you're willing to see through it all and clarify that message, that would be a thing that I think he's an incredible exemplar of. Find the thing that you care about and then just double and triple and quadruple and quintuple down on that thing.
That is exactly right. That is exactly
Man.
right. So speaking of bookends, we began this conversation with your description of your, I hate the word journey, but it is a journey, to like a much higher level of self-awareness and peace. And you're ending by describing, with admiration, Elon's decision to detach himself from the world, even as he engages in the things that he really loves. Do you think that there is a greater spiritual awareness, a greater hunger in Silicon Valley, where it matters because of the richest people in the country, than there was? You said, no one believes in God. Do you think that's changing?
No, but I think we need to make it more fashionable to be spiritual.
Oh, you don't think it's changing?
I don't think it's changing yet. I think that a lot of this extreme wealth was created in people that are in their 30s, some in their 20s. Many of them are in their 40s. And I think that over this next 10 or 15 years, there's going to be a crisis of identity when they realize that, they were playing dumb games focused on superficial things beyond the companies themselves.
Right.
And that there's a bigger purpose, right? There needs to be a loyalty to country, loyalty to the state, loyalty to the people around you that you don't even know. Not to virtue signal, but to actually just do the hard practical work. Part of that is rooted, I think, in a spirituality. That's not there yet. But I think that it will become cool again. It can become cool again. I believe in God. And the reason I believe in God, and if I were to tell my friends in Silicon Valley, the way that I would incept this idea would be purely from a scientific lens, which is, if you believe it is true, which I think most people do, that there is a finite moment in which the universe began. Explain not the process, but explain the moment. And you cannot. And it is an endless rabbit hole that if you spend your time, and again, when I was feeling very empty, that's where I started. And I read about Islam, I read about Christianity, I read about Judaism, I reread, about Buddhism. And the only explanation is God. And I think that that's a way where people there can be, they'll let their guard down. Because if you start a conversation about physics and cosmology and people are very open-minded, and then you go, well, how did it happen? How did t equals 0 happen? And what does t minus 1 look like? And their brains explode.
Why?
Their brains truly explode because people that are very good technologically in that way are very good at getting to explanations. And they're very good at kind of like breaking things down. I know it's used a lot now, but into first principles. And
Yes.
there is no first principles explanation for how the world, for how the universe began. There is none. Don't tell me about the Big Bang Theory. It doesn't work. Don't tell me about general relativity, because it all breaks. We have to make these profound assumptions in math and physics to make it all hang together. Because you cannot tell me what t equals 0 right at that moment. How? Nobody can answer the how.
No.
And so then if you look at this entire lived world around you, I don't know, I'm filled with this like immense gratitude. And then I think it must be God. And that gives me it gives me something. I didn't have that before. And so I take that. I'm not trying to push that on other people, but that works for me. You know, it makes me a better husband, makes me a better dad, it makes me a better friend. I do things now that when the fires were happening, my friends, I just round robin. I just kept calling them every day to check in on them. It's a small thing, right? But these are values that I had lost somewhere along the way where, just calling people, caring about people.
Yes.
One of my friends lost a home. I spent an entire afternoon, not an entire afternoon, sorry. Again, I don't want to overplay it. I spent like an hour or so going through all my Google photos, clicking through and finding all the photos of him, our friends, so that we can make him an album.
No.
Because he lost everything. And yeah, you get the clothes, whatever, but these picture albums, they mean a lot. And I was happy. And I felt really like a useful, good person at the end of that.
Yes.
I don't know. I got that from believing in God.
Right. And my final question is, are you hopeful, since we are at a moment of real change in the country, are you hopeful for the future?
Yeah. I think we had a fever, and that fever has broken. And what has to lie in its place are examples of how all of these things that we thought we were not allowed to do, when we do them, actually work. Meaning, we're actually just going to focus on merit and get incredible people. And it'll turn out that you'll get your, diversity wish, but you're not going to get it by mandating it and forcing it down our throats.
Right.
We're just going to get the best people. And then the best people are just going to go and kick ass together. We're going to get an ecology that we protect and love because we want to be out there hunting, fishing, camping, living it, skiing it, whatever it is. But we're going to get there because we actually manage it and take care of it and clean up all of the, stuff that would otherwise burn it to the ground. So we're going to test all of this stuff. And I think it's going to work. And then the other thing we need to do is we need to cut down all of these things that are these little ropes that are pulling us all back. Meaning, this is a stretch, but I'll use myself in this example. I think I'm one of those 50,000 people that can go and ram and jam for Team USA. I can. I've been, there are moments where I've been really dunking on people, if this was a basketball analogy. I want to do more of that. I want Team USA to kick ass. I just want it to be a little bit easier. And so I hope that we figure out a way to, instead of having 60,000 little regulations and people that want to lord over us, just give us 10,000 and just trust us that we're trying to do the right thing.
Exactly.
And if we don't, fine. Trust but verify, and if we screw up, fine. Hold us accountable. But just give us a chance so that we can just make sure that USA, Team America, that idea is the singular organizing function for America, not everybody's own little pet project.
Right.
So I think that's possible. But time will tell. These next 4 years will be super critical.
Chamath, thank you.
Thanks, sir.
So it turns out that YouTube is suppressing this show. On one level, that's not surprising. That's what they do. But on another level, it's shocking. With everything that's going on in the world right now, all the change taking place in our economy, and our politics, with the wars we're on the cusp of fighting right now, Google has decided you should have less information rather than more. And that is totally wrong. It's immoral. What can you do about it? Well, we could whine about it. That's a waste of time. We're not in charge of Google. Or we could find a way around it, a way that you could actually get information that is true, not intentionally deceptive. The way to do that on YouTube, we think, is to subscribe to our channel. Subscribe. Hit the little bell icon to be notified when we upload and share this video. That way you'll have a much higher chance of hearing actual news and information. So we hope that you'll do that.